It was 2002, and Spider-Man was all the rage for me. While the 90s cartoon is the iconic one that I grew up with, it was when the movie was announced that Spider-Man hype was through the roof for me. Aside from the movie though, I was just getting into a new comic series called Ultimate Spider-Man. Being a new take on Peter Parker as he went through his teenage years, it was immensely relatable to me as I just became a teenager when this book came out. Aside from the comic though, a new animated series released in 2004 that took place between the events of the first and second movie, but evoked the art style of Ultimate Spider-Man in a way, just with more mature storytelling and a bit darker overall. However, when I first got wind of an actual Ultimate Spider-Man game being developed for the 6th gen of consoles and was pushing new visual boundaries by capturing the comic art style perfectly, it was something of a fever dream for me. However, is Ultimate Spider-Man a game that is Excelsior, or is it less than spectacular? Let's find out. Ultimate Spider-Man starts off with Peter Parker facing off against Venom on a stormy night and is a fantastic opener as it recreates the scene from the Ultimate Venom story arc in the comic series. The moody setting and sleek comic style animated panels really immerse you in storytelling that was never quite done like this before. Taking place 3 months after the Venom arc in the Ultimate Spider-Man comic series, specifically issues 33 to 38, Peter Parker is just living his life, enjoying being with the girl of his dreams, Mary Jane Watson. However, we discover Venom is still alive and a more complex story continues. You will experience both Spider-Man and Venom's sides of the story, playing as both of them as you try to discover what Peter Parker's father and Eddie Brock's father were working on together, and for Peter to get some closure. Throughout the story, there are many other villains that will try to stop you, as well as Marvel characters that join into the overall story, like the Human Torch and Wolverine.
Nice mess.
I don't want to dive into many spoilers here as the story here is considered canon, but it is a really enjoyable one that does exactly what it needs to.
Hey you! Is that a rhinoceros horn or you just happy to see? I'm so scared I can't even finish my lame joke.
Ultimate Spider-Man's gameplay takes the open world mechanics that were built from Treyarch's previous efforts with Spider-Man 2 and tweaks it a bit to make it feel like an evolution, yet also feels like a more simplified version at the same time. The game has you tackling story missions in which you switch between Spider-Man and Venom to play as, and both characters play entirely different. First, let's talk about Spider-Man's gameplay aspect. Spidey will still swing with the R trigger, and holding the B button down will give him a speed boost when swinging. You can also web zip by holding the L trigger and then pressing R, and this comes in handy very often, especially when swinging around Queens. Spidey still clings to walls and ceilings as expected, but can also run alongside them, web zip along them, and even wall jump from them. He even has a double jump to throw into the mix. Combining the flow of swinging, double jumping, and running on buildings really makes for such an engaging, fun traversal system. In terms of combat, he can pull off punch and kick combos using the B and Y buttons respectively, and can throw enemies using the X button. Additionally, he can use his webs to string up enemies, and combining it with one of the face buttons will allow for a different set of moves here. Spidey can actually pull an enemy in to bash them in the head, somersault kick them into the air, or even flip forward and stomp on their face. If you're near a lamppost, you can actually web an enemy onto the lamppost itself and have him dangle from there. Additionally, when near a wall, you can press one of the attack buttons to lunge off of the wall and into an enemy to attack. The better your overall combat combo, the rating on the screen will actually change alongside with it. When your spider sense is tingling, you can try to dodge an incoming attack by simply jumping, as opposed to the previous Spider-Man 2 game having a dedicated dodge button. This is one of those simplified examples I meant earlier. What is interesting also is that enemies will need to be webbed up after you've depleted their health to truly ensure they don't get back up. I actually like this idea as it adds some depth and complexity to the combat.
I feel all warm and fuzzy now.
Now, in terms of Venom, here is where the gameplay is much different. As expected, Venom is pure brute force, using strong punch attacks and long tentacle attacks that have tons of radius to cover. He can also grab enemies and pummel their face into the ground, or even break their back entirely. Additionally, Venom can also pick up cars and throw them at enemies effortlessly. While Venom can't swing around the city, he has a massive lunging jump move in place of this, but can also use his arm to zip toward buildings. He can also scale up buildings and lunge jump from these as well. As strong as Venom is, there is a caveat here, and that is that his health is constantly depleting slowly. He needs to feed off of victims to keep his health up, or the symbiote host will consume Eddie to be powerless. You can hold the L button down when near enemies or civilians to consume their life force, and this definitely makes things tricky in more intense combat scenarios. Also, remember that balloon kid from the Spider-Man 2 game? Well, Venom can eat him. Yeah, Venom actually eats kids in this game. If you want to free roam as Venom though, you will need to wait until you've completed the main story to do so. When swinging through the city, there are city events that randomly appear, and these can range from saving a pedestrian hanging from a rooftop, someone who's hurt that needs to be brought to the hospital, stopping a runaway crew of thugs, or just stopping gang members out in the streets. Additionally, there are race events and combat tours littered around both Manhattan and Queens to tackle. Race events are basically checkpoint races to complete, and you can go for either bronze, silver, gold, or ultimate medals. These will test your traversal skills, as you will not only swing through checkpoints, but you may need to land on them directly or web zip through a ring checkpoint as well. These are a lot of fun and ramp up in difficulty over time after completing the Johnny Storm races. These particular races appear after completing a certain amount of race events within the difficulty bracket you're working through, and you meet Johnny at the top of the Empire State Building to race him through Manhattan and back. Completing a race with him will unlock the next difficulty set of races, but more importantly will increase your swing speed. Now, the combat tours are essentially waves and waves of gang members to take down throughout the city. Each time you defeat a wave, a health item drops to assist as you go to the next wave of enemies. Completing a certain number of these will gradually increase your maximum health for both Spider-Man and Venom. Overall, they both provide reasons to tackle these side missions when going between the actual story missions. If these weren't enough, there are numerous tokens to find around the map, like landmark tokens, comic book cover tokens, and secret tokens. You will need to complete a little bit of all of these in between story missions to help advance the story itself as well. Speaking of the game's missions, these range from going point to point defeating enemies until you reach the boss, or chasing a boss until you reach the point of actually facing off against them, at least more so on Spider-Man's side. However, there are times where you will need to rescue civilians within these missions, in which you may need to lift a car off of them and get them away from danger. Actually, when rescuing people, you may need to initiate a sequence where you need to alternate the L and R triggers to move a needle into the green area and balance it here. This mechanic also comes in play in other moments, like if Venom tries to consume Spider-Man and you need to break free. Venom's perspective has boss fights, but also more beat 'em up and escape sequences. He does have some of the chase the boss sequences as well. Chasing boss characters in the missions for each character will test your abilities, as these are quite challenging to keep up with at times. Boss fights overall are quite well done, having you utilize both the environment and skill set to defeat that boss, and each boss has some unique ways to defeat them. I will state, the final boss fight will most certainly challenge you the most, as a final boss typically should, if you don't upgrade your health bar. Upon beating the game, which the main story alone will only take you between 3 to 5 hours, you can go back and finish up all the race events, combat tours, or finding the remaining tokens. You can view in the pause menu all the landmarks, comic covers, and character models based on the tokens you found. What's nice is that you can actually open up the map and check all of New York City to see where all the events are taking place. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, completing the story will now give you the option to free roam with Venom and wreak havoc on the streets of New York just for fun. There are also unlockable costumes to switch between, like the black suit for Spidey, or swinging around with Peter Parker just wearing a hoodie. There are a few gripes I have with Ultimate Spider-Man though that I do need to address. First off, the lack of a new game plus is a shame, especially if you beat the story first, then did the side missions to unlock costumes, and now you can't use them for a subsequent playthrough. At the very least, I wish there was a mission replay feature. The next is the checkpoint system. There was one mission with Venom that I went through 3 different cutscenes in between sections of the mission itself, to only die later on, retry, and it set me back quite a bit. The combat also, while a lot of fun, does get a bit tedious when enemies are constantly blocking your attacks and rarely giving you a chance to actually complete a 5-hit combo. The last gripe I have is within the combat tours itself. While the race events have music playing, the combat tours are completely void of music, leading to just ambiance in the background while fighting waves of enemies.
This guy's all right.
It just makes it less engaging than it should be for the type of gameplay that's here. Other than these minor complaints mechanically, everything else really is great, honestly. Graphically, as you can see, Ultimate Spider-Man is a visually striking looking game. The team over at Treyarch worked closely with artist Mark Bagley to capture his artistic style and translate it perfectly in the game. The results were stunning and incredibly ambitious as well. Spider-Man himself animates smoothly, especially when swinging around the city. Letting go of your swing has him flipping through the air, and the animations here feel like an homage to the 2004 animated series, as they're basically the same. Venom also has good unique animations, whether leaping through the city or using his tentacle arms to attack foes. The city itself is well detailed and once again draws you in due to the comic art style. While there is pop-up throughout the city and texture details that load the closer you get to them, it does this while maintaining a solid 30 frames a second throughout. There are definitely frame drops though, and while not often within the gameplay, it's more apparent through the cutscenes.
Well, that's no good at all.
The cutscene's imaginative animated comic panels transitioning between the panels definitely appears to be taxing the GPU, and while maybe a bit more time in the oven would have helped iron this out, it's also very impressive to see in action. There are also fine details, like the web sticking to the building when web zipping to it, or even a web strand swaying back and forth after swinging from it. Even failing a mission with Spider-Man has this great backdrop of key characters from the actual comic drawing in the background itself looking at Peter in disappointment. The overall production values in this game were way ahead of its time. It just stumbles a bit with the performance in the cutscenes itself. In terms of audio, Ultimate Spider-Man does a spectacular job. The music, composed by Kevin Manthe, who worked on the Unreal Tournament games as well as Dead to Rights, does a great job comprising a score that fits the overall aesthetics of the game. The techno and cinematic compositions work really well at engaging you into the experience and sets the mood on point. Sean Marquette voices Spider-Man and does a great job of sounding like a teenage version of Peter, while the rest of the cast does an excellent job bringing life to each character, without a single one of them sounding offbeat. The sound effects of pummeling enemies is impactful, and all the audio effects for Venom are nailed perfectly. Swinging around the city has that awesome thwip sound and never gets old hearing it. And while I have the gripe about no music during combat tours, the ambiance of New York City itself is well done for the most part. The audio just matches the game so well, providing this excellent audio-visual package.
Only you can prevent Spider-Man fires. That light show took a lot out of you, huh? Is your head thicker than it used to be?
Ultimate Spider-Man is, in many ways, a game that was ahead of its time. In an era where licensed games were hit or miss, Ultimate Spider-Man showcased a licensed game done with a labor of love behind the source material. The production values in this were in another league, and captures the comic book aesthetic almost flawlessly, especially given the hardware. If you're a big Spider-Man fan and you haven't played this yet, I cannot recommend it enough. As the name of the comic book series and game itself insinuates, this is the ultimate Spider-Man experience for the GameCube.